The alarm didn't sound the way people imagine alarms do. There was no blaring siren, no flashing red lights flooding the concrete corridors of ADX Florence. Instead, it was a low, controlled tone, precise, measured, almost polite. The kind of sound designed not to incite panic, but to announce that something had gone terribly wrong in a place where nothing ever went wrong. At 4:17 a.m., deep inside America's most secure prison, a corrections officer froze mid-step. Cell Block D had gone silent. Not the normal silence. Not the heavy, constant hush that defined ADX Florence, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made your own breathing feel too loud. This was different. This was absence. Like a room after a scream had just ended. Officer Mark Ellison had worked at ADX for 11 years. He knew the rhythms of the prison the way sailors know tides. He could tell time by footsteps, recognize inmates by the sound of their movements, sense tension before it showed up on a report. And right now, his instincts were screaming. "Inmate D-231 hasn't responded," Ellison said quietly into his radio. The dispatcher didn't answer immediately. That delay, barely 2 seconds, felt longer than any alarm. "Repeat," came the voice, flat and controlled. Ellison swallowed. No response. No movement. No sound. ADX Florence was designed to erase unpredictability. Every inmate was monitored 23 hours a day. Cameras watched from angles inmates could never see. Cells were built to prevent communication, violence, even eye contact. And yet, somehow, something had slipped through. Ellison approached the cell door. Reinforced steel. Narrow slot window. He leaned forward, peering inside. The man on the other side didn't move. "Inmate D-231, Ellison called. "Step back from the door." Nothing. The inmate's name was Daniel Mercer. 38 years old. Former financial analyst turned domestic terrorist facilitator. No prior violent offenses. No history of self-harm. Transferred to ADX Florence after coordinating attacks from inside a federal prison using coded financial transactions. He was not supposed to be a problem. Ellison signaled to the control room. Procedures kicked in instantly. Textbook perfect. Cameras zoomed. Backup officers assembled. Medical staff stood by. The door unlocked with a hydraulic hiss that echoed down the corridor like a held breath finally released. Inside the cell, Mercer sat on the concrete bed, head tilted slightly to the side. His eyes were open. And carved into the wall behind him, scratched deep into the reinforced concrete with something no one could immediately identify, were 5 words that would ripple far beyond the prison walls. "I wasn't the first." By sunrise, ADX Florence was sealed tighter than it had been in years. Federal investigators arrived before the press even knew there was a story. No helicopters. No convoys. Just unmarked SUVs gliding through the Colorado desert like shadows. Special Agent Rebecca Harlan stepped out into the cold morning air and stared at the facility rising from the barren landscape. ADX Florence didn't look like a prison so much as a warning. Low-slung buildings. No towers. No visible fences from a distance. It was designed to disappear, just another structure swallowed by isolation. Harlan had spent her career chasing men who thought they were untouchable. Crime bosses. Terror financiers. Serial manipulators. But ADX Florence was different. This was where the system put people it couldn't control anywhere else. And now, someone had died inside it. Inside a prison that claimed 0 successful escapes. 0 inmate-on-inmate murders. 0 surprises. Cause of death. Harlan asked as she was escorted through security. "Pending," the warden replied. "Medical examiner says it's complicated." That word again. Complicated. They walked through corridors engineered to disorient. Subtle turns, identical doors, no windows to mark time. Every step felt intentional, like the building itself was watching. When they reached Mercer's cell, Harlan paused. The writing on the wall had already been photographed, documented, and partially scrubbed. But the scratches remained, deep, violent, desperate. "I wasn't the first." Harlan felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Who found him?" she asked. Officer Ellison. Bring him in. Ellison sat rigidly in the interview room, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. He wasn't afraid, not exactly. He was unsettled. Like a man whose understanding of gravity had just failed him. He was alive during count, Ellison said. I'm sure of it. How sure? Harlan asked. I spoke to him. He acknowledged me. What did he say? Ellison hesitated. He asked me what day it was. Harlan glanced up. That's it. No, Ellison said quietly. He said, if something happens to me, don't believe what they tell you. Harlan leaned back. Who's they? Ellison shook his head. I thought he was trying to mess with me. Inmates do that. Plant seeds. Get in your head. But it stayed with you. Yes. The medical examiner's report arrived an hour later, and it raised more questions than it answered. Mercer hadn't been strangled. He hadn't overdosed. There were no visible injuries. No signs of a struggle. No toxins in his system. Officially, the cause of death was listed as cardiac failure under unusual circumstances. Unofficially, no one believed it. Because Mercer's heart wasn't just stopped. It had ruptured. As investigators combed through Mercer's history, the picture grew stranger. His financial crimes had been meticulously planned, but his prison behavior was erratic in subtle ways. He filed dozens of grievances, none about mistreatment, all about missing time. He kept claiming he was being moved at night, said Agent Luis Moreno, scrolling through reports. Said he'd wake up in different positions. Different clothes folded differently. Thought staff were messing with him. And were they? Harlan asked. Moreno shook his head. No record of an authorized movement. No camera gaps. Nothing. ADX Florence had one of the most comprehensive surveillance systems in the world. Every hallway. Every door. Every cell. Except one. There's a maintenance corridor, Moreno said, lowering his voice. Old infrastructure. Predates some of the newer camera installs. Blind spot. Officially. No. Unofficially. There's a 90-second window where coverage overlaps poorly. Harlan closed her eyes for a moment. 90 seconds was an eternity. As they dug deeper, another detail emerged. One that hadn't been flagged before because no one thought to look. Daniel Mercer wasn't the first inmate to die under unusual circumstances in cell D231. He was the third. The first death had occurred 8 years earlier. An inmate named Paul Richter, former arms trafficker, found unresponsive in the same cell. Ruled a suicide due to stress-induced heart failure. The second came 4 years later. Elias Von, convicted cybercriminal. Same cell. Same conclusion. 3 men. Same location. Same vague cause of death. Different crimes. Different backgrounds. One shared ending. I wasn't the first. The words on the wall weren't a warning. They were a confession of knowledge. The deeper Harlan went, the more resistance she met. Files missing pages. Interviews delayed. Questions redirected. ADX Florence was cooperative in form, obstructive in spirit. This wasn't just a prison. It was a fortress of reputation. A symbol of control. And symbols don't like cracks. Late that night, Harlan stood alone in the observation room overlooking cell block D. The lights were dimmed. The corridor empty. For the first time since arriving, she felt something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. ADX Florence wasn't supposed to have secrets like this. It wasn't supposed to have patterns no one could explain. And it definitely wasn't supposed to have messages carved into concrete walls by dying men. Her phone buzzed. A message from Moreno. You need to see this. Now. In the records room, Moreno handed her a thin folder. Not digital. Paper. Found it misfiled under maintenance logs, he said. Didn't come from prison records. Harlan opened it. Inside were transcripts of interviews conducted by a federal task force she'd never heard of. Dates spanning over a decade. Names redacted. Locations classified. All referencing something called the Quiet Protocol. What is this? Harlan asked. Moreno shook his head. No idea. But every inmate mentioned in these files spent time in D Block, including Mercer. Harlan flipped to the last page. A handwritten note, scanned and attached. If they ever connect the cells, it's over. She looked up slowly. Connect the cells, she repeated. Moreno swallowed. There's more. He pulled out a photograph. Grainy. Time-stamped. It showed the inside of Mercer's cell, taken at 3:46 a.m. 31 minutes before Ellison found him. Mercer was standing, facing the wall, and someone else was in the cell with him. A figure blurred by motion, positioned just inside the camera's blind spot. Inside the most secure prison on Earth. Harlan stared at the image, her pulse pounding. ADX Florence wasn't just holding monsters. It was hiding one. And whatever it was, it had just reminded them it was still there. By the time dawn broke over the Colorado desert, Agent Rebecca Harlan hadn't slept. ADX Florence didn't feel quieter at night, it felt louder. Every mechanical hum, every distant footstep echoed with intent, like the building itself was listening. The photograph lay on the metal table between her and Moreno. One inmate cell. One supposed blind spot. One extra figure that should not, and could not, exist. Run it again, Harlan said. Moreno replayed the footage frame by frame on his tablet. The timestamp glowed cold and indifferent. 3:46 and 12 seconds a.m. Mercer stood rigid, shoulders tight, palms pressed flat against the concrete wall. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't pleading. He was waiting. At the edge of the frame, partially swallowed by shadow, the second figure leaned forward. No uniform. No visible restraints. Just the vague outline of a human shape where no human should be. Height estimate? Harlan asked. Hard to tell, Moreno replied. Camera distortion, motion blur. But, not an inmate build. Too controlled. Too still. Staff. Moreno hesitated. If it was, there'd be a record. Door logs. Badge scans. Something. But there isn't. No. Harlan exhaled slowly. Then someone is moving inside this prison without leaving fingerprints. Moreno didn't respond. He didn't need to. ADX Florence was designed to prevent exactly that. The quiet protocol wasn't mentioned in any official database. Not DOJ. Not BOP. Not Homeland Security. It didn't exist, at least not on paper. But the more Harlan pulled at the thread, the more resistance she felt. Her request for archived surveillance access was delayed. Her interview with senior staff was postponed. Even the warden, previously cooperative, now spoke in rehearsed phrases that sounded less like explanations and more like legal disclaimers. This facility operates under strict national security guidelines, the warden said, hands folded neatly on his desk. Some information is compartmentalized. Compartmentalized from who? Harlan asked. The warden met her eyes. From everyone. That was the moment she understood. This wasn't a rogue incident. This was policy. The first real crack came from someone who wasn't supposed to talk at all. His name was Thomas Keene. Former infrastructure engineer. Retired. Brought in as a consultant during ADX Florence's expansion years ago. According to records, he'd signed enough non-disclosure agreements to silence a city. But Keene was dying. Cancer had hollowed his face and softened his voice, but his eyes were still sharp, too sharp for a man who claimed he'd only worked on plumbing and ventilation. They met in a quiet diner 2 towns over. No recording devices. No notes. ADX wasn't built to rehabilitate, Keene said, stirring coffee he didn't drink. It was built to contain ideas. Harlan didn't interrupt. Some men don't stop being dangerous when you lock them up, he continued. They manipulate. They recruit. They inspire. Even in isolation. So you erase them? Harlan asked. Keene's mouth tightened. You monitor them. Study them. Push them until they break, or until they give you everything. The quiet protocol, Harlan said. Keene looked away. That's not what it was called at first, he said. It started as an experiment. Psychological containment. Stress thresholds. Induced compliance. On inmates. Yes. Harlan leaned forward. And when they died? Keene finally looked at her again. You don't call it death, he said. You call it failure to adapt. The pattern snapped into focus. Certain inmates, those with influence, intelligence, or the ability to command loyalty, were quietly flagged. Moved. Observed. Pressured. Subjected to conditions no oversight committee ever approved. No beatings. No obvious abuse. Just precision. Sleep disruption. Sensory manipulation. Controlled isolation layered on isolation. Enough stress to fracture the mind without leaving marks on the body. And cell D231? Harlan asked. Keene swallowed. That cell was refined. Refined how? It sat near old infrastructure. Maintenance corridors. Systems we never fully mapped once the expansion started. It became a place where variables could be tested. Harlan felt sick. You're telling me this prison has a lab? Keene didn't answer. He didn't need to. Back at ADX Florence, the tension thickened. Officers whispered. Supervisors hovered. Doors seemed to close a second faster than before. Officer Mark Ellison felt it more than anyone. Since Mercer's death, he'd been pulled from regular duty. Administrative leave, they called it. But no one checked on him. No one explained anything. Just silence. The kind that pressed inward. Ellison sat alone in his apartment when the knock came. 3 sharp taps. He opened the door to find a man he didn't recognize. Mid-40s. Plain clothes. Federal posture. You're Ellison, the man said. Yes. I need to ask you about Daniel Mercer. Ellison's chest tightened. I already gave a statement. This isn't official, the man replied. Which means it's important. Ellison hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat at the small kitchen table. The man didn't offer credentials. He didn't need to. Did Mercer ever say anything else to you? The man asked. Ellison stared at the table. He asked me if I believed in accidents. And? I told him accidents happen. The man nodded slowly. That was the wrong answer. Ellison looked up. What does that mean? The man stood. It means you were closer than you realized. Closer to what? The man paused at the door. To becoming the next variable. The door closed softly behind him. Ellison didn't sleep that night. Harlan learned about Ellison's visitor the next morning, from Ellison himself, who showed up unannounced outside the command center, pale and shaking. They're watching, Ellison said. Not like cameras. Like anticipation. Harlan brought him inside despite protocol. She could feel the walls closing in. This wasn't just about inmates anymore. This man, Ellison continued. He knew things. Things only staff would know. Did he threaten you? Ellison shook his head. No. He warned me. That was worse. As Harlan prepared to escalate the investigation beyond ADX Florence, she hit her first hard stop. Orders came down from above. Formal, unmistakable. Stand down. Jurisdiction revoked. Case reassigned. No explanation. Moreno slammed his fist against the wall when he read the memo. They're burying it. They're protecting it, Harlan corrected. What's the difference? Intent. Harlan knew what this meant. Officially, the case was over. Unofficially, it had just become dangerous. That night, she accessed the one thing she still could, archived psychological evaluations of D-block inmates. Most were sealed. One wasn't. Paul Richter, the first man to die in cell D231. His final evaluation ended with a single handwritten note from a prison psychologist. Subject demonstrates acute awareness of environmental manipulation. Claims the system is not designed to hold him, but to learn from him. Harlan scrolled further. Attached was an audio transcript, never logged, never reviewed. Richter's voice crackled through the speakers. They think this place is a grave, he said. But it's a mirror. And one day, someone's going to look into it and realize what they've become. The file ended abruptly. Timestamp missing. The next morning, an emergency alert rippled through the facility. Not an alarm. A lockdown. Inmate unaccounted for, the announcement said. Harlan's blood ran cold. That's impossible. Moreno was already pulling up feeds. Cell F119. High-risk detainee. Name. Moreno hesitated. Elias Von. Harlan stared at him. Von is dead. According to the records, Moreno said. But his cell is empty. ADX Florence didn't lose inmates. Ever. The cell showed no signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just a neatly folded jumpsuit on the bed. And carved into the wall, fresh, unmistakable, were 4 words. You finally noticed. Harlan felt the weight of it settle in her chest. This wasn't damage control. This was escalation. Whatever had been built inside ADX Florence was no longer contained. And it knew she was watching. ADX Florence went into full lockdown before noon. Not the kind meant for riots or escapes, this was surgical. Sections isolated. Power rerouted. Internal movement frozen to a crawl. The prison wasn't reacting to chaos. It was trying to contain a secret that had started to breathe. Agent Rebecca Harlan stood in the command center, watching feeds that showed nothing and everything at once. Empty corridors. Closed doors. Cells sealed like tombs. Somewhere inside that concrete maze, a man officially declared dead was moving freely. Elias Von. Or someone using his name. They want us blind, Moreno said quietly. Every feed loops back to clean footage from 20 minutes ago. They're not hiding, Harlan replied. They're controlling perspective. That was the quiet genius of it. The quiet protocol had never been about killing inmates. Death was just collateral. The real goal was refinement, identifying which minds bent, which resisted, and which learned. Someone had learned too well. They found the access point beneath the East Wing Chapel, an area rarely used, largely ceremonial, preserved for optics more than function. Old blueprints showed a forgotten maintenance shaft leading into a sublevel never fully integrated into modern security. Officially, it didn't exist. The door was hidden behind a removable wall panel, painted to blend seamlessly with the concrete. No alarms. No cameras. Inside, the air was colder. Whoever built this, Moreno said, knew exactly how to disappear. They descended into a corridor narrower than regulation standards. The walls were lined with outdated wiring, some of it still live. This wasn't a place inmates were supposed to reach. But someone had. At the end of the corridor was a room lit by a single fluorescent strip. Inside, a desk, a chair, and a wall covered in notes, handwritten, layered over years, some scratched deep into the surface like scars. Names. Dates. Cells. Every death. Every transfer. Every failure to adapt. This isn't an escape route, Harlan whispered. It's a control room. And in the center of it all sat Elias Von. Alive. Older. Thinner. But unmistakable. He didn't run. He didn't flinch. He simply looked up and smiled. Took you long enough, he said. Von had been a cybercriminal once. Brilliant, arrogant, dangerous in ways the justice system didn't fully understand. That was why he'd been sent to ADX Florence. That was why he'd been chosen. They thought they were studying me, Von said calmly as armed officers secured the room. But prisons are just systems. And systems can be learned. You were declared dead, Harlan said. Von nodded. Cardiac failure. Very clean. Very convenient. How? Moreno demanded. Von leaned back in his chair. The quiet protocol needed proof of concept. Someone to show it worked. I volunteered. Harlan stared at him. You let them kill you. I let them think they did, Von corrected. They wanted obedience. I gave them compliance. Over years, Von had learned every weakness, every blind spot, every undocumented corridor. He watched guards rotate. He memoized response times. He learned who asked questions and who followed orders without thinking. They believed intelligence could be isolated, he said. But intelligence adapts. And Mercer? Harlan asked. Von's smile faded. Mercer was a liability. He realized the experiment never ended. That some of us were never meant to leave. You killed him, Moreno said. No, Von replied softly. The system did. I just stopped warning him. Silence settled heavy in the room. The truth was uglier than Harlan expected. The quiet protocol hadn't been authorized at the highest levels. It had grown quietly, maintained by mid-level officials who believed they were protecting the country by pushing boundaries no one would officially approve. When inmates died, paperwork buried them. When someone survived, they studied why. And when Von disappeared, they panicked. Because he wasn't just a subject anymore. He was proof. Von was taken into custody without resistance. The room was sealed. Evidence catalogued. The hidden corridor photographed. For a moment, it felt like justice had finally arrived. But institutions don't confess easily. Within weeks, reports were sanitized. Language softened. Oversight committees convened behind closed doors. The quiet protocol was rebranded as discontinued research methodology. No indictments followed. ADX Florence remained open. Officially, Elias Von was never found alive. The public narrative closed cleanly. 3 inmate deaths attributed to stress-related complications. A system functioning as intended. Harlan was reassigned. Moreno took early retirement. Officer Ellison transferred out of federal service entirely. And ADX Florence returned to silence. 3 months later, in a different federal facility halfway across the country, a new inmate arrived under maximum restrictions. No name released. No prior history listed. Just a designation. During intake, the processing officer paused, staring at the man's file. Cell assignment? He asked. The computer blinked, then populated automatically. D231. The officer frowned. That cell's not supposed to exist. The inmate looked up slowly and smiled. Systems, he said, don't forget what they're built for. The door closed. The silence returned. And somewhere deep inside the architecture of control, something waited, patient, refined, and very much alive. They thought the prison survived the inmates. But the truth was far worse. The prison had learned from them. If this story got under your skin, remember, there are more buried truths where this came from. Stay close. You won't want to miss the next one.